Hello, welcome to the Loco Builder. This week we're looking at detailing our kit-built locomotives. And as you can see, I'm just cleaning off the bottom of the chassis of the London Road Models J3 in preparation for some soldering. I'm going to start off with the steps. I'm just cleaning these up with a sanding stick. I find that quite convenient. Just getting the surfaces nice and clean before soldering, and then using the glass fibre brush as well, just to ensure that everything is really clean. I've got the soldering iron switched on now. About 350 degrees is fine for this, and I'm using 145 degrees solder. As usual, I use plenty of flux. It's just a phosphoric acid based flux. And I'm just tinning the top of the step before I actually try and solder it onto the model, using self-locking tweezers there so I don't burn myself too much. Just making sure that the step is fully in position, and you can just see about there it just clicks in nicely, and that's often the case when you're soldering bits and pieces on like that. They do click into place. There is a little slot on the underside to accommodate these steps. Just making sure they're straight now, and I just wanted to show you here how you can tell when you've got a good joint. You can just see that little bit of solder creeping through there, and that ensures that's a good joint. All the steps are on now, and I'm just cleaning up my work a little bit with the glass fibre brush. It's nice to do that so you don't get too messy. Now I'm turning my attention to the smoke box door. Just drilling out with a pin vise and small drill bit the holes to accommodate the handrail pillars. I've already soldered one end of the handrail onto the pillar, and the other end is loose if I can actually pick it up there. And I'm just positioning in the two holes that I've drilled in order to get the spacing correct, and then I'll solder it off on the loose end. So you can see I've got a protrusion of 0.45 brass there just sticking out at the end, and I'm just going to fix that with solder. Again, plenty of flux, same sort of temperature on the iron really, and just introducing there the iron just to make that joint. Just a bit more flux, and then neatening up, just wiping away any excess solder just to make sure it's all nice and neat. Trimming off the excess, and then that's ready to fit to the smoke box door. You can see I've turned it upside down now, and I'm using super glue to fit this on. The reason for that is it's much easier than soldering this particular part of the locomotive, and we don't run the risk of melting any parts, and the solder isn't really necessary here. These aren't structural pieces, so it's fine just to use a bit of super glue on the back there. It's very runny super glue that I'm using. Ensures that it flows nicely through and holds that little handrail in place. Next, I'm fitting on the smoke box door dart, again using super glue. It's a non-structural part, so it's fine to use super glue on these sort of bits, making sure that's nice and central and in the correct place. Just checking my work just to make sure everything is straight and level, just positioning that door without glue just to see how we're going. Now I'm fitting the steam pipe to the front of the Loco. It's a cast brass part, so it does require quite a bit of heat from the iron, so just dwell with the iron a little bit more than you would normally just to fix that in place. And now the front coupling hook. This is a cosmetic coupler. Some people use these sprung. I'm using this as a cosmetic coupling hook, and it's going to have a 3-link coupling on the front of it. It's a freight locomotive, so it wasn't fitted with screw-link couplings. Again, plenty of flux to secure this little part in place, and I'm holding it with pliers because it's going to get quite hot, and I'm just tacking the back of the part there with the soldering iron just to initially get it in position, checking it for square, and then I'm just using my finger there to finish off the joint and ensure it's nice and secure in the front of the Loco. Again, it's quite a large-ish part, and there's quite a lot of metal around here, so I needed to dwell with the iron quite some bit. Now I'm just fitting part of the steam pipe system, just a little bit of 0.3 wire that I bent up into shape, and I'm just lightly tacking that on. It really only needs a small amount of solder to hold it in place. Now the front goalpost coupling. This is very similar to what you'd have on a Hornby locomotive or a Bachmann locomotive. It just doesn't have the hook on it. So it's just a goalpost, and I just solder that in place. It's 0.45 brass wire. It's very unobtrusive in the front of the Loco, so it's not really detailing parts per se, but it's part of the small parts that we fit onto the locomotive. And here I'm just zooming in to show you how I actually make the joint. As usual, plenty of flux, and again, just dwelling with the iron there to make sure that we've got a nice, strong joint there. Just a little look at what I've done so far. You can see the locomotive's really coming along now. And we're now going to move to fitting on the brass castings. Now, the white metal castings. Now here we use Patex. I'm sure you can get something similar. It's a two-part epoxy resin formulated specifically for metal parts. Mix it together in 2 equal. I've made far too much here. You always make far too much when you do this, but actually when you make too much you get a better ratio. It needs to be mixed 50-50, resin and hardener, and give it a really good mix on a piece of scrap card with a cocktail stick there to ensure it's fully incorporated. Then I'm going to apply some of this to the front of the locomotive where I'm going to place the smoke box door. I don't need much at all. You can see the amount that I've wasted, but it's really not a problem. Just placing the door on. Now this epoxy resin has a huge advantage over superglue in that you can position the part. With superglue this would probably grab just at the wrong moment as it's in the wrong place. However, with the epoxy I can move that around and make sure it's in exactly the right position. It takes about 5 minutes for this glue to go off. It's very hot here where I am, so it goes off very, very quickly indeed. And now I'm just applying the same glue to the back of the firebox casting as well, which goes inside the cab. Now here's one of the great advantages of using this stuff. Just before the glue's dried, after about 2 or 3 minutes, you'll be able to pick away at any excess with a cocktail stick, and that just neatens the edge of the glue joint. If there's any spillage, any glue's seeped out, you can just pick that away with the cocktail stick and neaten it up, and it acts as a filler as well, so it's ideal for attaching large brass parts. That's how I did the chimney and the dome as well, in exactly the same manner. Same with the back of the firebox there, just picking out any loose bits of glue that have seeped across. And here's the locomotive as it currently stands. I've added the sandbox actuators onto the side there, a few plastic bits as well just for added detail, and it's really coming along nicely. Got all the lamp irons in place, everything's looking nice and busy, everything's where it should be on the locomotive now, and I'm showing some really cruel close-ups just to highlight what we've done so far. The locomotive looking pretty smart, all the handrails are fitted, the cab's complete, and everything is pretty much done. I've decided to show you the tender as well. That was a really nice build, very crisp looking, very sharp, and again lamp iron detail, and of course those very prominent guard irons right at the back of this sterling tender. Goalpost coupling bar as well there, just on the end of the loco. Now we're coming on to fitting the boiler bands, and for this I just use standard electrical tape just onto a hard surface like a cutting board, and I'm just sticking this down, being careful not to stretch it. You don't want to stretch this stuff, otherwise it will sort of go out of shape and it will make funny errors in your cutting. I don't know why, but the makers put their name in the tape. It's quite frustrating. I'm just cleaning this up, getting rid of any of the excess glue on the tape. And now I'm just using a straight edge and a very sharp scalpel. Probably a new scalpel blade would be ideal for this, just to sharpen up the edge of the tape. Even if you've not got a maker's name in the tape, I would advise that you do this, because the edge of the tape will have lots of fluff and stuff, and we don't want that in our boiler bands. So just get rid of the bit that you don't need. Then I'm positioning the ruler, again just to cut very fine strips of tape. I actually made these too thick. I've subsequently redone them. Boiler bands are probably about 1 to 2 inches maximum in real life, so less than 1 millimeter. These are probably just over a millimeter, so they are slightly too big. And here I am just measuring up against the locomotive, cutting them into the individual bands. About 3 or 4 strips of tape will be sufficient. Just checking on the instructions where the boiler bands actually go. Also check your prototype photos as well, just to make sure you are getting it correct. And then you want a very fine pair of tweezers just to put the electrical tape onto the locomotive. It all looks very fiddly actually, but it's once you get into a rhythm with it, it's not too bad at all, and of course, being tape, it's infinitely adjustable. The alternative to this, of course, is to solder on the etched boiler bands that are included in the kit. However, I find this very tricky to do, and it takes me a long time. I'd make a huge mess, and I wouldn't be able to get them straight. However, with tape, yeah, it's a little bit fiddly, but I can do the job, and I think they actually end up looking much more subtle than even the etched brass ones. Just make sure that you anchor the tape firmly in place before you start messing around with it, and then tease it behind any fixtures and fittings like the handrails here. Pull it through with the tweezers. Sometimes it's frustrating, but just pull that through and secure it in place. Just take your time, trim off the excess and slot it underneath, making sure that it's straight all the while. Moving on now, I've done most of it. You can see just pulling through, and it's almost self-straightening. It almost goes with gravity, if you like. It falls down into pretty much the right place. Constantly just check your work, and if it looks right by eye, then it probably is. There's no point stressing over this and trying to get calipers out and measure distances and stuff. I just do this by eye. At the end of the day, if you're looking at it and it looks about right, then the chances are that it is about right. And you can see that I made a mistake, and so I can just rip off the boiler band and make a new one. So very straightforward. Always do a few more than you need just in case you do mess up. And there we go, just refitting the new one in the correct place. Easily done. A small pair of scissors helps, of course, as well. Once all the boiler bands are on, I just get a moistened cotton wool bud just to run over the top, remove any excess glue from the tape, and just press those boiler bands firmly down onto the model. Try not to stretch the tape, but certainly make sure that it's well pressed down. And once it's painted, and once you've gone over the top of this with your varnish, there's no chance these are going anywhere. They're part of the model now, and they look really, really good. And here we go, just finishing off with the close-up. You can see how fine these boiler bands are. I think they look absolutely fantastic. Well, that's all from me this week. I hope you enjoyed this little look at detailing the London Road Models J3. Remember to have a look on Instagram, and also remember to like and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thanks very much, I'll see you soon. Bye bye.